morning and or afternoon. Today is Friday, the 11th of March, 2022. I'm Brock Jennings.
And I'm Peter Clark.
And this is another episode of Intercontinental Media. And today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Volker Leppin, who is professor of historical theology at Yale University. Oh, and he happens to also be my secondary dissertation supervisor. But we are doing something very different from historical theology and, or in my case, systematic theology. And today we are talking about Silence of the Lambs. So, Volker, it is so wonderful that you have joined us. And it is lovely.
Yes, I always love speaking about things I don't know anything about.
Well, and as he may or may not have been telling me earlier, I do that all the time as a systematic theologian. So welcome to the party. We're making you a systematician today. And so, yes. So, maybe we start with, both of you have seen this movie before, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah, sure.
And both of you love it, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, I had not seen it like up close and personal, in other words, actually trying to watch it for many, many years. I don't know, at least 10 years. I watched it last year or the year before in German just for fun, but I wasn't really paying attention. And so getting reacquainted with it was really fascinating. But maybe we just go through and say some things that we enjoyed about this film or what makes this film worth watching again. It's over 30 years old.
Is it? Wow.
1991.
It's aged well.
I think I'm the one among us who watched it when it just came out freshly. So I was in Heidelberg at that time, and it was a great moving movie. It's just the thriller. You watch it from the first to the last minute, and you are surprised at any second. What I always had to think and to dream about was this situation when Claus Starling was ringing a bell and you heard the other bell, but someone watching it, you didn't know that they're two different bells, how this was cut together. That was just great in terms of movies. And as you ask, what did I especially love about it? It is seeing how an analytic brain, like Dr. Lecter, can be used for something good, and can use this for intimidating other people, for being cruel, for going on his track, to torment people. All this with this tremendous brain, and that says something about people who like being intellectuals, as I do.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's plenty. There's so much in this book, in the movie, about being an intellectual. There's even the throwaway line when she's talking to the entomologists, where one of them offers his opinion, the other one goes, "Ignore him. He's not even a PhD student."
That was the one line I missed in the movie. I was so taken with the fact she keeps getting hit on by all these sexist men that I lost the one, like the most intellectual line of the whole movie. So kudos to you, Peter, for catching it.
That's what you just are saying, that all those sexist men, that's so scaring looking at the second or I think even the third or fourth time. I'm not sure if I really noticed it when I watched it 30 years ago. The discussion was another one than it is nowadays. Mm-hmm. But now seeing from the first moment, as the doctor, as the prisoners, as all are somehow misusing her. Mm-hmm. And you are part of this. Again, coming to the last scene when she's in the basement looking for the criminal, and he's watching her. he's always watching her, and you are watching her with him. So you are part of misusing her, and that's really great in this movie.
Oh, it's amazing.
Okay, I never thought about it like that. I always thought, that scene is shot from James Gunn's point of view, but I hadn't thought that we as the viewer participate in the misuse and abuse of Clarice by partaking in the film. That's fascinating.
Yeah,
you feel that's what a church historian makes with the movie, just taking it as a source. They're asking what's the perspective of the source.
Yeah. One of the really fascinating things about this movie too, right, is the only character who really respects Clarice
is Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even he uses her to urge her to tell things she doesn't want to say.
Right.
It might help her saying this, but still there is a kind of disrespect.
Oh yeah.
Now, I had another take on that this is actually some kind of twisted love story between them both. And now that's perhaps because I have a little unfair advantage of having read all three of the books, Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, and Hannibal, and having seen all three of the films. And the love story aspect maybe is clearer in the later stuff, but it seemed to me like even when he says goodbye to Clarice, when he's in that nice fancy place in Tennessee and he's playing Glenn Gould's recording of Bach's Goldberg Variations is on in the background. I'm not sure what that says about Bach, but and he brushes her thumb with his just as they leave, and she doesn't flinch or doesn't, apart from the anxiety of being let out of there because she's not supposed to be there anymore, there's no flinch back on her part, or there's no disgust in that gesture. And that's what it made me wonder if there is some kind of love going on between them.
I think so too. Yes, it might be a kind of love story, but again, a very asymmetric one. Mm. It is the usual love story of the beast catching a pretty young woman, and he brings it around. She has the duty to use him for looking for the other criminal, and then he uses her. Always, that's what men do with women, and that's it is difficult to call this really a love story. It is, as very often love stories are told in history, in novels, and in movies. But we also start to think differently about this kind of love story.
It's a twisted love story in any case, and I wouldn't necessarily put the fault on her when I say that, for the record. I think as we're all sort of agreeing here, even Hannibal, the person that treats Clarice with the most respect, is still somehow abusing her or taking advantage of her. But he's doing it in, actually, what do you both think of this? In his particular way of using her, he's the most manipulative of them all. The others Absolutely. Are direct about it. He gains her sympathy somehow. Mm-hmm. He's that good. Dr. and I'm forgetting the name, Dr. Crawford, John Crawford, or whatever his name is. He told Clarice, you don't want Lecter inside your head.
Yeah.
And Lecter got there, and he got there by being a gentleman when the other people in that cell, or in that dungeon, I want to call it. I don't have another word for it than dungeon. When those other people were just being total perverted monsters to her.
Yeah. Well, she even says when talking to her roommate, I think, she's not scared of Lecter coming after her because he would see that as rude. So there's this interesting sort of perverted ethic that he has.
So it remains perverted. I think I took it like you do when I watched it first time as, oh yes, he's the smart gentleman. He's the one who helps her in a difficult situation. He's the one approaching her. But again, that's what so many male people do with women. And that's a kind of masking their brutality. And I think this movies are also about how to mask brutality in a nice face like Anthony Hopkins with this very tender view he sometimes has. But behind his eyes, there is someone who can beat people, who can bite into their faces, who can bring them to blood. And he could do this with Clarice, and he does it at least mentally.
And perhaps his manipulation of Clarice is the worst kind of beating that he does from this standpoint.
I think so, yeah.
Because what he will do is he will leave an impact on her, or an imprint, I want to say, on her, that 10 years later she will still be facing when they come back in the sequel. And in the book, in the Hannibal book, it's even worse. She runs off with him. She runs off with him, and they have a relationship. I don't know, I can't remember if they get married or not. But they do become full-on lovers in the book. And that was the reason that Jodie Foster refused to play Clarice Starling again in the movie adaptation. And so they changed the ending, and I don't think the ending in the movie works as well.
Really? I love the ending of Hannibal.
Well, I not when you've read the book, because it's so much more shocking. But even after they changed the ending, Jodie Foster said no. She was just that unsettled by the development in the character, and so it was offered to Julianne Moore. But in any case, just staying with Silence of the Lambs, it's Hannibal's abuse of Starling that is the most long-lasting. I mean, even how many times did Clarice get these passing comments that I guess men in the FBI did 30 years ago, and perhaps they still do today, I don't know. But how many times did she endure that, or have her competence questioned, right? In some way or another, her competence questioned. And yet Hannibal manipulates her by, in a sense, saying how competent she is.
And at the end, when people at least acknowledge her success and she's celebrated, then Hannibal, makes her knowing about his coming murder. He tells her, I have someone for dinner, and it is quite obvious what the dinner will look like. And she has to know that and has to live with this knowledge.
Although I admit I love that line, I'm having an old friend
for dinner.
It is a great line, but if you think what this means, it is nothing to love.
No, I know. He's such a suave bad guy.
Exactly.
Well, he's so suave that you almost don't think he's bad.
Well, that's the danger, right?
That's the
really scary part about Hannibal Lecter.
And that's again what smart and intellectual people at least can do. So questioning ourselves, it means, what do we do with our polite habit, which we have learned somewhere? What do we do with our ability to speak in an educated, learned way, if we don't think really to what purpose do we use this? He is speaking as someone who's in the academics, he's one of us. He's absolutely one of us. He's a typical academic, and he knows how to do conversation with academics, and that's so dangerous.
Well, I think getting on that point, just the fact that he's still always called doctor.
Yeah.
Always.
Right. Yeah.
Now that was interesting. I did a little bit of pausing and trying to zoom when Clarice is looking at the microfilms of the articles.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question about addressing him as doctor, and I don't know how this works because in Hannibal, he signs when he writes this nice letter to Clarice on this fancy paper, this fancy pen and ink and all this. He says something, your old friend Hannibal Lecter, M.D. But in the just pausing the screen and looking at the microfilm, trying to read what was written there, supposed to be an article, which yes, I did that. It said in that article that in a sense he was stripped of his right to practice.
Right, but that doesn't make you no longer an MD.
Okay, that was my question.
I am still Peter Clark, MDiv.
Even though you're not practicing as a pastor.
Even though I'm not practicing as a pastor. I'm no longer the Reverend Peter Clark.
Well, that's particularly my question. If you're no longer the Reverend Peter Clark, yet you still have an MDiv, why is Hannibal Lecter still being addressed as doctor if his right to practice has been taken away?
Because you can't strip academic titles. And doctor is an academic title.
But in his context with an MD, I thought that was connected, being called doctor was connected to practice.
No, doctor is almost always an academic title. In my understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a typical American problem that doctor has this two meanings of practicing and of being an academic title. For Germany, it's no problem to see. Yeah, it's nothing more than a title.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was. But in any case, the fact that that everyone except Chilton at one time when he was insulting him, everyone calls Hannibal Lecter Dr. Lecter. You never hear him addressed by his first name except for when Chilton and Lecter are in the cell together and Chilton makes Lecter the actual offer for expanded privileges. Mm-hmm. In other words, he's being set up as some kind of academic throughout the whole thing and demanding that respect from everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's somehow compartmentalizing your academic achievements and your own mental health and your ethical behavior in society. These are completely different branches of life for him and also for others.
Mm-hmm. It makes one wonder if they should be, though. I mean, he's trying to, in other words, he's trying to present himself as, I'm this accomplished intellectual, right? I listen to Glenn Gould playing Bach. I have my nice drawings of Florence. You know, I have in that expanded cell in Tennessee, he's got the Bon Appetit food magazine, right? He's asking for lamb chops raw, or medium rare rather. It's all
very
this sort
rare.
of
Lamb chops, very rare.
Very rare, right? Extra rare. I can't remember the exact word, but all of these stereotypically high class, cultured, intellectual. Oh, and he's also a sociopath or a psychopath, I suppose.
Right. Well, that's on purpose. That's supposed to set up that contrast.
And again, speaking very much as a German. As Germans, we know from the history from the 20th century that even very cultivated people would be able to be murderers, mass murderers in the Third Reich. And they also were hiding this behind this being someone listening to Bach, and that they even urged Jews to play in an orchestra for them in Theresienstadt, in the concentration camp. So and they at home they played being very well, smart, good, educated people, but they were brutal mass murderers. And so, to me, the figure of Dr. Hannibal Lecter is somehow figurizing anthropologically what a Nazi figure could be.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a reading that I had never thought of. That is profound. And also very, very frightening. I begin to understand why this movie is called psychological horror.
Mm-hmm.
It is, yeah.
And I didn't, even when I looked at it again this morning, Germany time, it's ironic, I'm the only one of the three of us in Germany at the moment. This is very ironic. But even when I looked at it again this morning, I thought, well, this isn't horror. I mean, this is... I'm not sure what it is, but it's not horror. And now, as we're unpacking this and thinking about it again, I understand that it is horror, but it's a certain kind of horror. It's well, what would you both call it in terms of a subsection of horror? Certainly not gothic horror.
No, I'd call it psychological horror.
You would agree with that.
Yeah.
And you too, Volker.
Yeah, I would too. I see the difference to another kind of horror movies. It is not just looking at building a tension and looking for situations which will you surprise. It does that all, but there is a story behind, and that makes it this psychological horror movie. There is a story between all those people interacting. And this story pushes you back and forward, and this story makes it less easy than in most horror movies to understand who is bad and who is good. You are always looking for this, and it is clear Hannibal Lecter is bad, but he has so many signs in him until the end that you would say there are sympathetic strains in him, while most horror movies, I do not watch many horror movies, but most of them which I watch, they have a situation in them when the seemingly nice, good person suddenly becomes bad. But then they is bad until the end. Hannibal Lecter is defined as bad, as a prisoner, as a mass murderer from the beginning on. But from the beginning on, you see other sides in him, and that makes it so interesting and so self-questioning.
So, are you trying to say that most horror movies are pretty simplistic compared to this one?
I don't want to start a debate about Stephen King with you this morning.
Well, first of all,
I could do.
Stephen King is about the books. We do not speak about Stephen King in movies, do we, Peter?
Except we've done an entire episode on one of them.
Yeah, that's because I was in the mood for masochism. But no, with Stephen King, it is about books and the brilliance of his character descriptions, not about movies. But I do think it's warranted. When thinking about horror as a genre, to say there are different types. There's the kind of horror that college kids watch when they're getting drunk, which doesn't interest me at all, frankly. Then there's the kind of gothic horror of a Dracula, which I love. And then there's the sort of supernatural horror that we did here a couple of weeks ago, Peter. Volker, have you seen The Omen?
No. Haven't seen it.
Okay, we looked at that one. When did we do that, Peter? Last month?
Yeah.
And that was more supernatural, where sort of, or The Exorcist, that would be another example, where sort of evil enters into the picture and how do the characters deal with it. So there's that. Then we looked at 2 weeks ago, we looked at Alien. Have you seen Alien?
Yes, I did, unfortunately.
Well, that's sort of how I felt about it. Thank you. I have an ally now, because Peter and I were debating this just a couple of weeks ago, and Peter said that I didn't like Alien because I'm an existential optimist instead of an existential absurdist.
I'm not sure if this applies to you, but I will take it to me. Yeah, maybe I'm an optimist, and that's why I too don't like it.
Well, yeah, but Alien somehow fits in horror, but that's, I don't know what I would even call that. Peter, what would you call Alien for horror?
Existential dread.
Okay, existential dread. And then there's this movie today, which is sheer psychological manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if out of all of these subgenres or whatever, that Silence of the Lambs is the one that mirrors most closely the actual reality of evil. Hard to define.
Good point.
Yet quite banal when you can define it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you take it's really interesting if you take a look at the serial killers that it's based on.
Admittedly, research I did not do. Peter, I'm trying to learn how to watch movies, remember?
I know.
I didn't take any notes.
I am a, for lack of a better term, serial killer enthusiast.
I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, but okay.
Probably fair. And so the I can't remember his name, Gates or something like that. Ed Gein, who made Dresses Out of Women. He actually died here in Madison, at one of the last mental health institutes in the state. And he was ruled completely mentally insane. But so that's where the crimes are based off of, but the personality is based off of, I believe it's Ed Kemper, who was a very educated, very erudite serial killer who ended up turning himself in, probably would have never been caught if he hadn't turned himself in, and became a primary source for the FBI in developing their behavior analysis unit. As he discussed and psychoanalyzed himself with the FBI about why and how he committed his crimes.
He psychoanalyzed himself with the FBI?
Yeah.
I think that's not according to the rules of psychoanalysts, but
well, it was before, it was while they were making the rules. They didn't know what they were doing yet. They decided to start interviewing serial killers, and he was incredibly talkative and incredibly interested in, he was also incredibly interested in what makes a serial killer, because he recognized that what he did was against the mores of society, but that he also recognized that he lacked those mores.
There's a very odd egoism in that.
Oh, there's a massive amount of egoism in it. There's a good chance if you listen to older audiobooks, you've listened to Ed Kemper's voice.
Note to self, don't listen to older audiobooks. Thank you for that tip.
Because that was actually one of the things he did a lot of in prison, was he recorded audiobooks. Very prolific on this point.
Interesting. I now begin to see the similarities between Hannibal and him.
Yeah.
Now, my guilty pleasure for serial killers, I have one too, but my guilty pleasure is to learn about Ted Bundy for some reason.
Yeah?
Is Ted Bundy so known in Germany? I don't think so.
Not really, no. I heard the name, but I couldn't tell the story.
Very charming man.
Charming, and manipulated women and brutalized them and murdered them. I think there were a couple of men too. Bundy
was mostly men, I thought.
Was it? Oh. Well, apparently my guilty pleasure, I don't pay close enough attention. But
no, you're right. It was mostly women. I'm thinking of someone else. I'm thinking of either Gacy or Dahmer. I'm not sure.
Heaven forbid we mix up our serial killers on a Friday. I mean, but in any case, what fascinated
What kind of education did you both enjoy knowing so many serial killers?
Casey, I was
Well,
thinking
what are
of
you
Casey.
doing all the time?
I would stay up late watching the History Channel while I was working on papers in college.
Never tell a historian you watch the History Channel, just for the record.
This was back when it was mostly Hitler and serial killers.
Okay.
Back in the 2000s.
And I, for some reason, when I was teaching myself German, began to watch serial killer documentaries on Netflix writ large.
And you learned German by this? What German did you learn? Is it helpful for your dissertation?
Not at all. Not at all. No, I actually learned German by reading Karl Barth and watching Gillian Anderson in Sex Education on Netflix. Two very different kinds of German.
Interesting combination, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was how I did it. But when I wasn't doing that, I would watch all these serial killer documentaries. And I thought I told you that one time, actually. I had been working all day. I said, well, I'm going to have my brains ooze out my ears.
You told
and
me, yeah.
Yes. And watch my serial killer documentaries. And I don't know why, but I guess for me it was the question of what makes someone do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
What goes wrong in somebody's mind or consciousness or whatever that would cause them to wish to harm another human or another creature in this way. And I went down this massive bunny trail, if you will, because
isn't this the question for any murderer? The interesting in a serial murderer, I think, is indeed the serious. And what kind of personality is it that says I need a certain order in committing crimes?
It sounds like a systematic theologian gone bad, to be honest.
Good point. That's what I want you to say.
See, I've learned something from you in 3 years. But seriously, that, although I wasn't asking that question, why does somebody need an order in the way they kill? It wasn't that. It was the larger question of why does anybody do this? What's the motivation, or what goes wrong in the upbringing? Or it was just such like, I don't want to believe it actually exists, right? In this sense, I want to be a good Enlightenment enthusiast and say, well, with the right amount of education and training and so on and so forth, you can get rid of this primitive behavior. And, well, clearly not. That would be like saying you can get rid of evil.
Well, and yet, so here's the thing, right? We don't even have the real concept of the serial killer until after the Enlightenment.
You broke me somehow, Peter, but I can't figure out how.
Well, so you look at historical, there are mass murderers in history, but they tend to get their jollies off through war. Until after the Enlightenment, when they start targeting individuals.
So what's the link? Perhaps the
I don't know, but I'm just challenging the Enlightenment can fix this attitude.
Thanks, but I was already challenging it myself. You just gave me more data to do so. Perhaps the professional historian among us has an idea of what changed with the Enlightenment for this concept of serial killer to emerge.
I still have to think about if this is true. What do you say? And then I might think about interpreting it. I don't have an idea at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's not that we don't think so historically, it's not that we don't think serial killers don't exist. It's just that they aren't documented until after the Enlightenment.
Yeah, that sounds more reasonable, I think, somehow.
Yeah.
To interpret it, I think one had to think about any theories of Michel Foucault, or he wrote a lot about the chain of understanding of crimes. But I don't have an idea from my side.
Yeah.
And
I'm just thinking to bring another point on the table. I'm thinking about the movie again, and if this idea of connecting the serial murder with the question of killing lambs isn't a kind of a vegetarian or even vegan, but I think in that time more vegetarian message in this movie, saying, yeah, you are wondering what makes a human being a serial murderer of human beings, but you don't wonder what it makes yourself killing lambs all the time, even if they are screaming at a child, is empathetic enough to want those lambs to be silent.
Yeah. I mean, I totally get that, because I in high school I found out some of the practices surrounding veal, and I've started. I'm not a vegetarian, but I started avoiding veal, in particular the slaughter of yearling cattle.
Yeah, but you like how chicken are held?
I don't love. I mean, I try and buy ethical meat as much as I can, but
I'm not a vegetarian too, to be honest.
Yeah, you know. But this is actually probably one of the things that caused my fiance to dump me. My first fiance, she ended up moving to Alaska and becoming a vegan after we broke up.
Oh yeah,
and I wouldn't become a vegan.
I'm just thinking about it. Am I right that Jodie Foster is a vegetarian? I think so, but I'm not sure about. At least I wanted to. It took a long time for me to understand this line of Silence of the Lamb. To be honest, when I watched the movie first, I didn't grasp the line about those lambs, and so I still after watching the movie, I wondered why now this title. Later on, it was quite clear. But it has something to do with how we human beings deal with our co-creatures.
Yeah. The title actually comes from, in the book, one of the last lines is, "She sleeps now in the silence of the lambs."
Yeah, that's what I understood from the movie too. But as I said, not the first time. I was too scared to really understand this.
Yeah, it's much more when you saw the movie.
I was.
Wow, that's interesting. I saw the movie the first time when I was 13. So how old am I now? 34. So however
21 years ago.
21 years ago, thank you. It was going, what is it, 30 or 20 years?
We know about you in mathematics, Brach.
Yeah, they don't work. Okay, they're not going to. That's why I became a theologian. Now I lost my train of thought. I saw the movie when I was 13 and wasn't scared at all.
Really?
What kind of 13-year-old boy have you been?
The only thing that ever scared me in horror, that ever just scared me to death. Well, no, actually not the only. There were two things. The first was Nightmare on Elm Street with Freddy Krueger, which is my all-time favorite horror movie, and that's why we opened our show with that in January. That one got me, and there was a movie in 2003 or 4 that came out, I can't remember, called The Ring.
Oh, The Ring is good.
Oh my God. I hated that movie. It was terrifying. Silence of the Lambs.
1 week.
You know what? I had somebody prank call my house after I watched that movie with a group of people. That was so horrible.
Oh my gosh.
It was so horrible. But this one didn't scare me. I fell in love with it. I saw Hannibal right then after. I think I saw Silence of the Lambs in November, then I saw Hannibal, and then Manhunter, which is the one without Anthony Hopkins from 86, I think, 85, something in there. I watched that, and then I saw Red Dragon in the theaters, and I was so excited because Anthony Hopkins was coming back to play Hannibal one last time. So instead of going to my freshman homecoming dance, because who wants to go to that, I took my homecoming date to see Red Dragon.
Nice.
And then I read all the books at the end of my freshman year of high school. And I even bought the script, the screenplay to Red Dragon. So I was never frightened by Hannibal Lecter. It was only Freddy Krueger and that dumb movie that I still hate today called The Ring. We will never review that on here, Peter.
Okay, that's fair.
I'm wondering if this makes me understand your theological preferences, but I'm not sure about.
How would it exactly?
Don't want to try it here.
Yeah, well, there was something about Freddy Krueger. I was just young enough. I mean, when I'm 10 or 11, we were in Switzerland actually, and I didn't know a word of German. But flipping through the TV channels, and there comes Freddy Krueger, and oh my God, I didn't sleep at all that night. Just horrid. But the others, and The Ring got me. I don't know why. I guess when you get a phone call that says you've got a week to live, and I don't know, for some reason that got me. But and that was just, I don't know, Peter. I can't even remember that movie. It just, even just the thought of it just terrifies me. The trauma goes too deep. But
it's more along the lines of Alien and that existentialist dread.
See, you're just going to get me with that existential absurdism stuff.
God, I love it.
Volker, you have not seen The Ring, have you?
No, I haven't. If it was 2003 or 4, that was the time when we had very young children and no time to go to cinemas.
Well, you didn't miss anything from my perspective.
Good to hear.
You're better off without that movie. Just why did anybody make that? But Peter, you love it.
That's a great movie. It's I don't know that I have a need to see it again, but I'm glad I have seen it. It's very scary, very very dreadful.
I don't know. Maybe that's the point of the movie. Maybe this is what Silence of the Lambs should have done to me. Instead, I just fell in love with it. I tried to find everything Anthony Hopkins was in. I don't know how successful I was, but I
wonder if there isn't something in terms of the intellectual mind that sees themselves in Hannibal Lecter. That
I am so not sure what to say to that right now. Well, okay, the intellectual mind. I certainly.
Because he's on the surface a very rational killer. And the more you dig into it, like especially you get into the other stuff, like you start with Silence of the Lambs, you watch Hannibal, you watch Red Dragon. He is not. So to use this probably won't mean anything to either of you, but to use Dungeons and Dragons alignment terms, which is best I have, he's not a chaotic evil. He's not this chaotic kind of evil, spreading evil for evil. So he's a lawful evil. He has a code he abides by.
Yeah, he's got a strange ethic of ethic of justice.
Yeah.
Got halfway through saying that, and then I thought, well, that's nonsense. And I thought, no, actually, I'm onto something. In Red Dragon, they make it clear that he murders the flutist of the Baltimore Symphony because the flutist can't play in tune. Well, there's part of me that goes, I mean, I don't agree with murdering the person, but, getting rid of them if they can't play in tune, well, that kind of makes sense, actually. Well,
it seems to resonate with you, yeah?
Well, yes. And, well, then he goes maybe a bit overboard and he serves the flutist for dinner to the board of the orchestra. And, but yeah, he has an odd sense of justice. Art deserves to be respected.
Well, it's just like, it's like Clarice says at the end, he won't come after me. He would consider that rude.
I understand that his reasons to murder are somehow rational, but is his way to murder rational too? If I'm just thinking about this situation when he is imprisoned with those two guardians, and then he's very tricky in becoming free and get rid of those two policemen. But then he bites them, and that's not very rational.
That's where it breaks
to knock
through.
them out.
Yeah, that's where it falls apart. He seems very calm and collected and rational, and then he is suddenly very passionate in the commission of crime.
But he's passionate.
Is a nice word for that. Yeah.
What would you prefer, psychopathic?
I would, yes. But you can be passionate in love or something like that, and so that's not clear enough for me to describe what he's doing.
That's fair.
Maybe the best instance, maybe the paradox of him, if I might use that word, is seen best after he bashes the police officer's head in, and then he starts conducting Glenn Gould right after he does it. You disagree?
No, I agree. That's what makes him so strange and so that this conducting makes him so close to us again. As murdering the flutist who doesn't get the tune makes him at least close to you, Brach. But I understand what you mean with this. That's always about this living in culture. And that's the other side without any culture.
So maybe the trick is then just to listen to trashy music all the time, and then we won't become serial killers.
I would be glad if you could say that. I would be happy.
I'm not sure I could exist, but, I guess we just have to trust that I'm not a serial killer. But that is something I wondered, what is it saying as well about high art? I mean, his drawings are stellar. The way he draws the scene from Florence. Go ahead, Peter. Sorry.
But I think that's one of the things that becomes terrifying about him is I think Lecter sees his crimes as high art.
Oh.
Right? I don't think there's a difference. I don't think those two things become separated to us. Right? We see this conflict. We see this hypocrisy. But the terrifying thing is I don't think he does. Because again, he doesn't just, he bites the guy and all that, but if we look at the other crimes that we know he's committed from having watched the rest of the movies, he's not some rank cannibal who just eats other people's flesh. He is a gourmand. He makes fancy dishes and eats the finest parts of the body.
So you always say he is. Is he, or does he only think to be?
Right. Well, sorry. Yeah, he thinks he is. Well, no, I think he is a gourmand because we see him eating fine food that isn't people. He's just it's a very twisted, perverted sense of the gourmand in that he also includes people in his diet.
Well, this is perfect. The Hannibal Lecter is a perfect example of how art and culture and all the fine things in life, the good things in life, can be misused toward deadly, destructive ends.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, and maybe that's yet another aspect of what makes it more terrifying than I thought. I mean, I admit as a kid thinking of him as somehow the odd hero of the movie. He gets free. Right? And then as I got a little older, I thought, well, no, he is the twisted psychopath. But you know what? In comparison to Chilton, who also is a sleazy well, he's an idiot pretending to be an intellectual, right?
Yes.
He's just an idiot. But if I had to pick Chilton and Lecter, I'd pick Lecter because Lecter's at least got some kind of class and reason behind what he's doing. You know, I'm not sorry, frankly, that this movie ends with Hannibal Lecter eating Chilton. I'm not sorry for that. What does that say? I mean,
what he did with you as being a child, that you thought he's the hero of the movie. That's what psychopathic people always do. All things are circling around them. So it again took a long time for me to understand that if you would tell an easy story, the criminal to be found is this this Gumb, this Buffalo Bill guy, but this person is not in the center of the movie. This person should be in the center because it starts with how do we get this person? But the main person always is this Hannibal Lecter, just supporting the hunting of Buffalo Bill. Mm-hmm. He manages it that all people are thinking about him, and we are talking all the time about him instead of the great Clarice Starling, instead of Buffalo Bill. We always have in mind this Hannibal Lecter. He's the one interesting people.
Mm-hmm. What does that say about Anthony Hopkins, who played him so convincingly, for the record?
That he's a great actor, but Jodie Foster is a great actor too.
Well, yes, and did she outsmart Hannibal, or was she ultimately seduced by him?
I think she was more seduced by him, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Even as competent and brilliant as she clearly is, somehow he manipulated her, mm-hmm. as we were talking earlier. But I was just wondering, because she ultimately solves the case without him.
Does she?
Yeah, right.
All right. Why don't you think she does?
Because she at the end she says, "Okay, Hannibal said go back to first principles. Everything we need is already in the case file." She goes back to his words.
Right. Yeah.
When do we learn when do we first learn to covet? We covet what we see every day. And so that leads her to go back to the first murder. Where did the first murder happen? Okay, then we need to check out, we need to pay attention to the first murder, because that was probably where we'll find Buffalo Bill.
Does she see Hannibal Lecter as a twisted kind of professor of hers?
As a mentor, maybe?
Those two things don't necessarily need to be apart, Peter.
No, I know. I don't. So there's, to me, a professors and mentors, there's a Venn diagram that they overlap.
Okay. I get it. I'm just going on the fact of that he was supposed to be such an academic. Clarice Starling is clearly an academic, right? Mm-hmm. She points out to Crawford that Crawford gave her an A- rather than an A, which I thought was sort of hilarious. Clearly she's trying, and probably has to, prove herself, right? There's only one other female trainee that's shown in that movie. That's her, mm-hmm. her friend, the African-American student.
Yeah.
Whose name I'm forgetting. I'm bad with names in movies. But there's so she's clearly got to prove herself to all these people. I wonder if somehow that exhaustion is why she's not quite as sharp as she could be with Hannibal manipulating her. Right? I mean, this is somebody who is somehow always trying to fight for her existence in a male-dominated profession.
Yeah, there's part of that, but I think part of it too is she's so success-oriented, so driven that way. You can almost see the moment where she starts to let Hannibal manipulate her.
And when would that moment be?
When she's so desperate for the name that she tells him the story about the lambs. because she pushes against that. She pushes against that. She says, I don't want to tell you that. I don't want to tell you that. That's not, I need the name. I need the name now. And he's finally like, why did you run away, Clarice? And she drops it. She drops her guard. She chooses to, on a certain level, she chooses to let him manipulate her.
Do either one of you think she's secretly in love with him?
I don't think she's secretly in love with him yet.
And I don't like what you said. She chooses let him manipulate.
I'm lacking a vocabulary there for what I want to say.
It is just, again, thinking about the typical story of male and female beings. And too often it is said the suppressed female being is the one who let the other do this.
Right.
He didn't let him. He urged her to do.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Succumbs might be a better word than chooses.
Yeah.
I was going to say feels she has to, which I suppose succumbs is the more succinct way of saying that. Right? She feels she has no choice other than to reveal this incredibly personal part of... I would say, although in any case, I would say Hannibal has an interest in her.
Oh, absolutely.
Hannibal has as much of an interest in her as Miggs does. The fellow inmate whom Lecter caused to swallow his own tongue.
Right.
Is that even possible? I didn't know swallowing one's own tongue was physiologically possible.
It is if you sever the little dangly bit down there.
Okay.
Please don't show it more deeply than so far.
Well, it's like the tongue is an incredibly long organ, right? It goes down to here or something.
Yeah.
In the human, and so how do you swallow your own tongue? But in any case, thank you, Peter, for clearing that up. That's a question I've had for 21 years now.
Research is one of my specialties. I get weird questions in my head and decide to research the answer to them, and so I am a font of useless information.
Well, that is precisely why I chose to do a dissertation, just in a different area than tongue swallowing. But in any case, Lecter is as evil toward Clarice Starling as Miggs is. That for me, that for me is what is coming to light from our conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a definite parallel there, and I think there is in his own way, Hannibal Lecter he plays off what he does to Miggs as in defense of Clarice, but I think he is more angry that Miggs has attempted to mark what Hannibal sees as his.
I was going to say that he does that with Miggs to try to earn Clarice's trust somehow. But
no, he earns Clarice's trust by agreeing to look at the case file.
Okay.
What he does to Miggs, he does for himself.
My last question. I feel compelled to ask this because of some reading that I did about this film. I don't remember when. Did either of you catch an anti-queer vibe in this movie? Because this was highly controversial. Again, something I didn't know until recently. Particularly because it was said that the movie was transphobic. Did either one of you see that?
I think there's a reading that can be done there, but I think that's a surface level reading.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you pay attention to what Dr. Lecter actually says, he says that Buffalo Bill is not transsexual. In fact, they address the issue that transsexuals are far more likely to have violence committed upon them than to be violent. And one of the ways that they find Jane Gum is by looking for people who have been rejected for sex reassignment surgery because they don't actually fit the psychological profile of a transsexual. And so I think on a surface reading, it's anti-trans. You can definitely see it as a surface reading, it's anti-trans, but I think if you dig deeper, it actually addresses some of the harm being done to the trans community, especially at the time.
Actually, doing harm is always a question also of reception. I agree with what you are saying about what is meant in those words, but nevertheless, there can be a reception among the trans community and among the anti-trans community, which would see an anti-trans position embraced by this movie. So that's I don't have an answer to this, but if this is the case with in a time in which we get the more and more sensitive about this question, we also have to think differently about this movie. Just follow the discussion.
That's fair.
Yeah, and I think when I became aware of that critique of the movie, it did cause me to see it in a different light as well. But I'm also not sure on where I am with that. But in any case, that's something maybe to keep pondering. And I don't know, I assume people still watch this movie, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's not. Although, why is everything I love a minimum of 30 years old? That's not fair. And 30 years old is new, but from my ears. But in any case, as time goes on, I just wonder if that critique will become more vocal again, because it was when it first came out, believe it or not, which I was unaware of. So I wonder if now, as people are making harsh criticisms of past works of art, be it music, movies, or visual art, or books, if this movie will also, in a sense, get canceled.
I think on a certain level, we're more sophisticated about some of that stuff now. And there's also a lot of questions. People are more willing to address issues of intent.
Okay.
And very much the intent of both the book and the movie is not to be anti-trans.
But Volker was just telling us that it's not about intent; it's about reception.
Well, it's about. I'm going to make the argument that it's about both, and that it's an ongoing. I think with this movie, it's not so simple and clear cut that it will just be canceled. I think it's a piece that will continue to be discussed in both aspects.
And what does our historian today think? I love making historians predict the future. It's one of my favorite things.
And so, the usual answer for a historian, I'm not a prophet. So as a historian, I know that estimations of things that values in society are changing, and they are changing quicker and quicker. And so no prediction is possible. It has to be a sensitive following of the discussion, and maybe there will come a time when we will revoke our conviction about this movie and say we haven't seen enough how the problems are in it. I'm not at that state at the moment, but if understanding of it changes, my own understanding has to change too.
Well, on that note, I think we will bid adieu to this film. I'm sure we could keep going. There are many things we haven't talked about, but I think we have at least more than scratched the surface.
Absolutely.
And to Volker Leppin, thank you so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure.
And until next time, I'm Brach Jennings.
And I'm Peter Clark.
And this is Intercontinental Media.
You're not good enough for Beverly. You're not good enough for anything. You've been bitten by a boyish child.